Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, Episode 4. Mr. Earnshaw invited him, and he called on Mr. Earnshaw. I had a presentiment in the bottom of my heart that he had better have remained away. In the middle of the night I was wakened by Mrs. Linton. "I cannot rest, Ellen," she said, "and Edgar is sulky. I praised Heathcliff, and he began to cry, so I got up and left him. It is childish, melting into tears because I said that Heathcliff was now worthy of anyone's regard." "What do you think of his going to Wuthering Heights?" I inquired. "He said he called to gather information concerning me from you, supposing you resided there still. Hindley came out and questioned him about what he had been doing and desired him to walk in. There were some persons sitting at cards, and Heathcliff joined them. My brother lost some money to him, and finding him plentifully supplied, requested that he come again in the evening. Heathcliff affirms a wish to live within walking distance from the Grange, and means to offer liberal payment for permission to lodge at the Heights, and doubtless my brother will accept. He was always greedy." "Have you no fear of the consequences, Mrs. Linton?" said I. "None for my friend. His strong head will keep him from danger. This evening has reconciled me to God and humanity, and, as proof, I'll go and make my peace with Edgar. Good night." The success of her fulfilled resolution was obvious on the morrow. Mr. Linton had lost his ill temper and ventured no objection to her taking Isabella to Wuthering Heights in the afternoon, and she rewarded him with sweetness and affection in return. Mr. Heathcliff used the liberty of visiting at Thrushcross Grange cautiously at first, until he gradually established his right to be expected. A new source of trouble sprang from the misfortune of Isabella Linton evincing a sudden and irresistible attraction towards the tolerated guest. She was a charming young lady of 18, infantile in manners, though possessed of keen wit, keen feelings, and a keen temper if irritated. Her brother, who loved her tenderly, was appalled at this fantastic preference. Apart from the fact that his property, in default of male heirs, might pass into Heathcliff's power, he had sense to comprehend that, though Heathcliff's exterior was altered, his mind was unchangeable and unchanged. He dreaded that mind. It revolted him, and he shrank from the idea of committing Isabella to its keeping. He would have recoiled still more had he been aware that her attachment rose unsolicited and awakened no reciprocation of sentiment. We had all remarked that Miss Linton fretted over something. She grew cross and wearisome, snapping at Catherine continually. One day she burst out that it was Catherine's harshness which made her unhappy. "Harsh?" cried the mistress. "When have I been harsh?" "In our walk along the moor, you told me to ramble where I pleased, while you sauntered on with Mr. Heathcliff. You wished me away, because you knew I liked to be there. I won't always be sent off. You desired no one to be loved but yourself, Cathy, but I love him more than ever you loved Edgar, and he might love me if you would let him." "Nelly, help me to convince her of her madness. Tell her what Heathcliff is. He'd crush you like a sparrow's egg, Isabella, if he found you troublesome. I know he couldn't love a Linton, and yet he'd be quite capable of marrying your fortune. I'm his friend, so much so that had he thought seriously to catch you, I should perhaps have held my tongue and let you fall into his trap." "For shame," said Isabella angrily. "You are a poisonous friend." "Ah, you won't believe me then," said Catherine. "You think I speak from wicked selfishness." "I'm certain you do," retorted Isabella, as Mrs. Linton left the room. "She uttered falsehoods, didn't she?" sobbed the girl. "Mr. Heathcliff is not a fiend. He has an honourable soul, hasn't he, Nelly?" "Banish him from your thoughts, miss," I said. Mrs. Linton spoke strongly, and yet I can't contradict her. She is better acquainted with his heart than I, and she would never represent him as worse than he is. Why is he staying at Wuthering Heights, the house of a man whom he abhors? They say Mr. Earnshaw is worse since he came. They sit up all night together, and Hindley has been borrowing money on his land and does nothing but gamble and drink. All his money goes into Heathcliff's pocket. Now, Miss Linton, you would never think of desiring such a husband, would you? I'll not listen to your slanders, Ellen, she replied. The day after, my master was obliged to be away on business, and Mr. Heathcliff, aware of his absence, called. Catherine and Isabella were sitting in the library on hostile terms, but silent. "Come in," exclaimed the mistress gaily. "Here are two people sadly in need of a third to thaw the ice between them. Heathcliff, I'm proud to show you at last somebody that dotes on you more than myself. My poor little sister-in-law is breaking her heart by mere contemplation of your physical and moral beauty, and it lies in your power to be Edgar's brother. No, no, Isabella, you shan't run off," she continued, holding the girl who had risen indignantly. "Catherine," cried Isabella, "please let me go." "By no means," cried Mrs. Linton. "You shall stay. Now then, Heathcliff, why don't you evince satisfaction at my pleasant news?" "She wishes to be out of my society now, at any rate," said Heathcliff, and he stared hard at Isabella as one might do at a strange, repulsive animal. The poor thing couldn't bear it. She grew white and red in rapid succession, and while tears beaded her lashes, used her fingers and nails to loosen the firm clutch of Catherine. "There's a tigress!" exclaimed Mrs. Linton, setting her free and shaking her hand with pain. "Begone, for God's sake!" "I'd wrench her fingers if they ever menaced me," he answered brutally, when the door had closed after her. "But what did you mean by teasing the creature in that manner, Cathy? You were not speaking the truth, were you?" "I assure you I was," she returned, "but don't notice it further. I wished to punish her for her sauciness, that's all. I like her too well, my dear Heathcliff, to let you seize and devour her." "And I like her too ill to attempt it. She's her brother's heir, is she not?" he asked after a brief silence. "I should be sorry to think so. 6 nephews shall erase her title, please heaven." She dismissed the subject, but Heathcliff, I felt certain, recalled it often. One time I passed the gate of the farm at Wuthering Heights, and I observed a brown-eyed boy standing beside it. It was Hareton, my Hareton, not altered greatly since I left him 10 months since. "Oh, God bless thee, darling," I cried. "Hareton, it's Nelly, your nurse." He retreated out of arm's length and picked up a large flint. "I am come to see thy father, Hareton," I added. The stone struck my bonnet, and then ensued from the lips of the little fellow a string of curses. Fit to cry, I took an orange from my pocket and offered it to him. He snatched it from my hold. I showed another, keeping it out of his reach. "Who has taught you these fine words, my boy?" I inquired. "The curate?" "Damn the curate and thee! Give me that!" he replied. "Tell me, where have you got your lessons, and you shall have it," said I. "Who is your master?" "Devil Daddy," was his answer. "And what do you learn from Daddy?" I continued. "Naught," said he, "but to keep out of his gate. Daddy cannot bide me because I swear at him." "And who teaches you to swear at Daddy?" I observed. "Heathcliff." "Do you like Mr. Heathcliff?" "Aye," he answered again. I put the orange in his hand, turned directly, and went down the road. The next time Heathcliff came, Miss Linton chanced to be in the courtyard. He had not the habit of bestowing a single unnecessary civility on her, I knew. Now, as soon as he beheld her, he stepped across and said something. She seemed embarrassed and desirous of getting away to prevent it. He laid his hand on her arm. She averted her face. There was a rapid glance at the house, and, supposing himself unseen, the scoundrel embraced her. "You are a deliberate deceiver," I muttered. "Who is, Nelly?" said Catherine's voice at my elbow. "Your worthless friend," I answered. "I wonder he will find a plausible excuse for making love to Miss when he told you he hated her." Mrs. Linton saw Isabella tear herself free and run into the garden. Heathcliff opened the door. "Heathcliff," began Catherine, "what are you about? I said you must let Isabella alone. I beg you will, unless you are tired of being received here and wish Linton to draw the bolts against you. Why have you disregarded my request?" "What is it to you?" he growled. "I have a right to kiss her if she chooses, and you have no right to object. I am not your husband. You needn't be jealous of me." "I am not jealous of you," replied the mistress. "If you like Isabella, you shall marry her. But do you like her? Tell the truth, Heathcliff." "There, you won't answer. I'm certain you don't." "If I imagined you really wished me to marry Isabella, I'd cut my throat," said Heathcliff. "Meantime, thank you for telling me your sister-in-law's secret. I swear I'll make the most of it." The conversation ceased, and I left them to seek the master. "Ellen," said he, "have you seen your mistress?" "Yes, she's in the kitchen, sir," I answered. "She's sadly put out by Mr. Heathcliff's behaviour." And I related the scene in the courtyard. "This is insufferable," he exclaimed. "It is disgraceful that she should own him for a friend and force his company on me. Call the men, Ellen. Catherine shall linger no longer to argue with the low ruffian. I have humoured her enough." He bid the servants wait in the passage and went to the kitchen. "How is this?" said Linton, addressing his wife, "after the behaviour of that villain?" "Have you been listening at the door, Edgar?" asked the mistress, in a tone to provoke her husband. Heathcliff gave a sneering laugh. "I've been so far forbearing with you, sir," he said quietly, "not that I was ignorant of your miserable, degraded character, but I felt you were only partly responsible for that, and Catherine, wishing to keep up your acquaintance, I acquiesced, foolishly. Your presence is a moral poison, and to prevent worse consequence, I shall deny you hereafter admission into this house. I now require your instant departure." "Cathy, this lamb of yours threatens like a bull," Heathcliff said. "By God, Linton, I'm mortally sorry that you are not worth knocking down." My master signed me to fetch the men, but Mrs. Linton, suspecting something, pulled me back, slammed the door to, and locked it. "Fair means," she said. "If you have not courage to attack him, make an apology or allow yourself to be beaten. I'm delightfully rewarded for my kindness to each of you. After constant indulgence of one's weak nature and the other's bad one, I earn for thanks 2 samples of blind ingratitude. Edgar, I was defending you and yours, and I wish Heathcliff may flog you sick for daring to think an evil thought of me." The master tried to wrest the key from Catherine's grasp, and she flung it into the fire, whereupon he was taken with a nervous trembling and grew deadly pale. He leant on the back of a chair and covered his face. "I wish you all the joy of the milk-blooded coward, Cathy," said her friend. "And that is the shivering thing you preferred to me?" He gave the chair on which Linton rested a push. My master quickly sprang erect and struck him full on the throat, a blow that took his breath for a minute, and while he choked, Mr. Linton walked out by the back door into the yard. "There, you've done with coming here," cried Catherine. Get away now! He'll return with pistols and 6 men. You've played me an ill turn, Heathcliff. But go, make haste!" "Do you suppose I'm going with that blow burning in my throat?" he thundered. "By hell, no! I'll crush his ribs in like a rotten nut before I cross the threshold." "He is coming," I said, "with the coachman and the 2 gardeners. You'll surely not wait to be thrust into the road by them. Each has a weapon." Heathcliff, on second thoughts, resolved to avoid a struggle against 3 underlings. He seized the poker, smashed the lock from the inner door, and made his escape. "Oh, I'm nearly out of my mind, Nelly," Catherine exclaimed, throwing herself on the sofa. "Tell Isabella to shun me, and say to Edgar that I am in danger of being seriously ill. Oh, I wish it may prove true. I want to frighten him. And if I cannot keep Heathcliff for my friend, if Edgar will be mean and jealous, I'll break their hearts by breaking my own." I did not wish to frighten her husband. Therefore, I said nothing when I met him coming towards the parlour. But I took the liberty of turning back to listen whether they would resume their quarrel together. He began to speak first without any anger in his voice, but with much sorrow. "I shall not stay. I am neither come to wrangle nor to be reconciled, but I wish just to learn whether you will give up Heathcliff hereafter, or will you give up me. It is impossible for you to be my friend and his at the same time, and I absolutely require to know which you choose." "I require to be left alone," said Catherine furiously. "I demand it. Don't you see? I can scarcely stand. Leave me." She rang the bell till it broke. I entered leisurely. There she lay, dashing her head against the arm of the sofa, in such a senseless, wicked rage. Linton looked terrified. "There is nothing the matter," I whispered. But she heard me, for she started up, rushed from the room, and locked herself in her own chamber. The next morning I went to ask whether she would have some breakfast carried up. "No," she replied. The same question was repeated at dinner and tea, and again on the morrow after, and received the same answer. Mr. Linton spent his time in the library, and did not inquire concerning his wife's occupation. Isabella and he had had an hour's interview, during which he tried to elicit from her some sentiment of proper horror for Heathcliff's advances, but he could make nothing of her evasive replies. On the 3rd day, Mrs. Linton unbarred her door and desired fresh water, for she believed she was dying. That I set down as a speech meant for Edgar's ears. I believed no such thing, so I kept it to myself and bought her some tea and dry toast. She ate and drank eagerly and sank back on her pillow. A good while after, I heard her murmur, "No, I'll not die. He'd be glad. He does not love me at all. He would never miss me." "But what is that apathetic being doing?" she demanded. "Has he fallen into a lethargy, or is he dead?" "Neither," replied I. "Mr. Linton is well, I think. He is continually among his books, since he has no other society." I should not have spoken so if I had known her true condition, but I couldn't get rid of the notion that she had acted a part of her disorder. "Among his books?" she cried, confounded. "And I dying on the brink of the grave! My God, does he not know how I'm altered? If I were only sure it would kill him, I'd kill myself directly. These 3 awful nights I've never closed my lids, and I've been tormented, I've been haunted. What has he to do with books when I am dying?" Tossing about, she increased her feverish bewilderment to madness, and tore the pillow with her teeth. Then, raising herself up, all burning, desired that I would open the window. We were in the middle of winter. The wind blew strong and I objected. A minute previously she was violent. Now, supported on one arm and not noticing my refusal to obey her, she seemed to find childish diversion in pulling the feathers from the rents she had just made. "Did you see that face?" she inquired, gazing earnestly at the mirror. Say what I could, I was incapable of making her comprehend it to be her own, so I rose and covered it with a shawl. "It's behind there still," she pursued anxiously. "Who is it? I hope it will not come out when you're gone. Oh, Nelly, the room is haunted. I am afraid of being alone." Her fingers clutched the clothes and gathered them over her eyes. I attempted to steal to the door with the intention of calling her husband, but was summoned back by a piercing shriek. The shawl had dropped from her frame. "Why, what is the matter?" I cried. "That is the glass, the mirror, Mrs. Linton, and you see yourself in it. And there am I, too, by your side." Trembling, she held me fast, and the horror gradually passed from her countenance. "Oh, dear, I thought I was at home," she sighed. "I thought I was lying in my chamber at Wuthering Heights. I'm weak. My brain got confused and I screamed unconsciously." She lay still, her face bathed in tears. "How long is it since I shut myself in here?" she asked. "It was Monday evening," I replied, "and this is Thursday night." "Well, it seems a weary number of hours," she muttered. "I remember being in the parlour after they had quarrelled, and Edgar being cruelly provoking, and me running into this room desperate. As soon as ever I had barred the door, utter blackness overwhelmed me, and I fell on the floor. I thought, as I lay there, that I was enclosed in the oak-panelled bed at home, and my heart ached with some great grief. I was a child. My father was just buried, and my misery arose from the separation that Hindley had ordered between me and Heathcliff. Oh, I am burning. I wish I were out of doors. I wish I were a girl again, half savage, half hardy, and free, and laughing at injuries, not maddening under them. Why am I so changed? I'm sure I should be myself, were I once among the heather on those hills. I must open the window wide." And sliding from the bed, she threw it back and bent out careless of the frosty air that cut about her shoulders as keen as a knife. I attempted to force her to retire, but I soon found her delirious strength much surpassed mine. Not a light gleamed from any house far or near, and those at Wuthering Heights were never visible. Still, she asserted she caught their shining. "Look!" she cried eagerly. "That's my room, with the candle in it, and the other candle is in Joseph's room. Joseph, waiting till I come home, that he may lock the gate. Well, he'll wait a while yet. It's a rough journey, and we must pass by Gimmerton Church. We've braved its ghosts often together, and dared each other to stand among the graves and ask them to come. But, Heathcliff, if I dare you now, will you venture? If you do, I'll keep you. I'll not lie there by myself. They may bury me 12 feet deep, but I won't rest until you are with me. I never will."